When it comes to medieval medicine, we often think of bloodletting, mercury treatments, and a general lack of basic hygiene. But while these practices certainly played a role, medieval physicians weren't always so far from modern medical thinking. In fact, during the Middle Ages, if you were suffering from psychological problems, you might have been given an operation that today would land your doctor in prison for manslaughter. In 17th centuries, to treat everything from headaches to epilepsy, and even mental illness. Today we look at trepanation as an extremely risky procedure, one that is almost never performed unless absolutely necessary. During the Middle Ages, however, the procedure was viewed as a relatively common treatment, something that could be done as an outpatient procedure and was often attempted by those without any formal medical training. This isn't to say that trepanation was a risk-free procedure, but when the alternative is death by disease or death by witchcraft, as it often was, trepanation started to seem less like a barbaric practice and more like an enlightened solution. So why exactly did medieval doctors drill holes into people's heads? And what do their actions tell us about the state of medieval mental health care? To answer that question, let's travel back to 1347. You've probably heard of the Black Death before, the bubonic plague that killed millions across Europe. What you may not have realized is that the Black Death wasn't the first plague to hit Europe, nor was it the last. In fact, during the Middle Ages, plagues were so common that they were often classified by the century in which they occurred. There was the plague of Justinian in the 6th century, the Black Death in the 14th century, and the Third Plague pandemic in the 17th century. In the year 1347, the citizens of the Holy Roman Empire were getting over the latest plague, when word arrived that a ship had docked in Sicily, carrying with it a new batch of rats, fleas, and disease. Before long, the streets of Germany were littered with corpses, and the people who hadn't yet died were starting to panic. Now, it is important to remember that the people of the Middle Ages understood disease differently than we do today. They didn't know that diseases were caused by bacteria or viruses. Instead, they believed that illnesses were often sent by God as punishment for sins, or the result of an imbalance in the four humors, or qualities of the body: blood, phlegm, yellow, and black bile. As the plague spread, the people became convinced that the only way to stop it was to find someone to blame. Medieval anti-Semitism was already high, and the Christians of Europe wasted no time in blaming them for the pestilence. Soon, Jewish communities were being massacred across the Holy Roman Empire, and the survivors were fleeing for their lives. But the Jews weren't the only ones under attack. Those who didn't die quickly enough were abandoned by their families and left to fend for themselves. And many of these poor souls suffered not just from the physical symptoms of the plague, but also from the psychological trauma of seeing their entire world come crashing down around them. And that's where our story gets really interesting, because in the midst of this chaos and fear, there was one group of people who offered comfort and solace: the monks. As the plague was killing off thousands, the Catholic Church opened up its doors and welcomed the sick and dying inside. At first, the monks cared for the victims of the plague as best they could. But soon they were faced with a problem they couldn't solve: the mentally ill. The monks were trained to save souls, not to care for troubled minds, and the people afflicted with psychological disorders were too much for them to handle. It's important to remember that during the Middle Ages, mental illness was not seen as an illness at all, but rather as a sign of demonic possession. And the treatment for possession was simple: exorcism. The problem was that exorcisms didn't always work, and sometimes the demon inside a person was simply too powerful to be driven out. For these cases, the church had another solution: trepanation, or drilling a hole into the skull. Now you may be wondering why the church thought that this would help. After all, if a person is possessed by a demon, wouldn't the only effective treatment be to cast the demon out? In fact, in some cases, the line between the two was blurred beyond recognition. On January 22, 1374, Anne went to confession at the Church of St. James in Paris. She told the priest that she hadn't committed any serious sins, but he saw something in her eyes, something that told him otherwise. He listened as she rambled on about the devil, telling him that he was the Antichrist, that he was going to destroy the world, and that he was after her soul. Then, as he watched in horror, Anne ripped off her dress and started to eat it. Clearly, this was a woman who was out of her mind. We don't know exactly where she went, but we do know that she came out of it with a large hole in her skull. In Anne's case, the procedure worked. She was cured of her madness and returned to normal life. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, In some cases, the operation made things worse. He suffered from epileptic seizures and was brought to a monastery in Lorraine in hopes that the monks could help him. The brothers prayed over him and decided that he needed to be treated. Joseph was laid on a table and drilled until his skull was filled with sawdust. Afterwards, he was wrapped in bandages and sent home, but the procedure seemed to have little effect on his illness. These stories are not isolated incidents. In fact, they were part of a widespread practice that lasted for centuries. From the 8th to the 17th century, monks and priests across Europe drilled holes into the skulls of people they believed to be possessed, and the procedure was not always performed by those with medical training. Take, for example, the case of a man known as Little John, who lived in the village of Alcester, England in the 16th century. One day, Little John started acting strangely. He was seen dancing and singing in the street and making strange noises. The villagers believed him to be possessed, and so they brought him to the local barber to have his skull drilled. The barber put Little John under a pillow and struck the top of his head with a heavy iron poker until it caved in. Well, during the Middle Ages, there were laws against murder, but the definition of murder was much different than it is today. In fact, during the Middle Ages, it was perfectly legal to kill someone if you believed that they were possessed by the devil. This is exactly what happened in the case of Little John. But why was it that the people of the Middle Ages believed that drilling a hole into someone's skull would cure their mental illness? During the Middle Ages, medicine was a mix of ancient Greek and Roman teachings, as well as a lot of folk wisdom. Doctors believed that the human body was made up of 4 elements: earth, air, fire. When a person was ill, it was because one or more of these humors was out of balance. The practice of giving enemas was used to flush out an excess of phlegm, and purgatives were used to get rid of an excess of bile. The idea was that by drilling a hole into the skull, you were releasing the evil spirit that was inside the person. These were doctors and healers who were trying their best to help their patients. They just had a different understanding of the world. But as the centuries passed and new discoveries were made, trepanation fell out of favor. The methods have come a long way since the days of the monks. So what do you think? Do you think that the medieval monks were onto something with their trepanation treatments, or is it just a crazy and dangerous idea? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. As always, please remember to support us by liking this video and sharing it with friends and family who may enjoy such videos like this. Also, feel free to join our community server, where we discuss various topics ranging from true crime to psychology and everything in between. We also have an archive channel that contains time-sensitive content that is not available on YouTube for various reasons. The link to the server is provided below. Today's story was suggested by several members, so here we go. A man wakes up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum solo gone wild. The year is 1941. Rumors of lobotomies gone wrong are making the rounds. In the sterile halls of Boston State Hospital, Dr. Howard Dandy sits up in bed, his gaze fixed on the starched white ceiling. Suddenly, it hits him, a memory that's as vivid as if it just happened. It's a case he worked on about 2 years prior. A young girl, only 14, had been brought in after she tried to take her own life. Her parents, desperate to fix their daughter, begged Dandy to perform the procedure. Dandy agreed. But now, in the quiet solitude of the night, he can't help but wonder if he made the right decision. He remembers the day of the operation like it was yesterday. The girl was awake for the procedure. She even joked, trying to lighten the mood with dark humor. But as Dandy made the incision, he saw a look of pure terror flash across her face. Then she stopped moving. He felt her pulse. It was gone. Dandy didn't mean to kill her. He was supposed to save her. Was it the prefrontal lobotomy? The procedure meant to sever the connections in her brain responsible for rational thought and emotions, leaving only peace in its wake. Or was it something else? Today, we delve into the chilling tale of lobotomy gone wrong. The first documented prefrontal lobotomy dates back to 1888, when a Portuguese psychiatrist, Dr. Agostinho José Delgado, performed the procedure on a Lobo patient. Though the surgery brought him fame, it led to his downfall. The patient's condition worsened, and he was eventually confined to an insane asylum himself, dying there in 1905. Over the years, lobotomy was refined by several doctors, including Egas Manet, who introduced the transorbital lobotomy in 1935. This method involved inserting a surgical instrument through the eye socket to reach the brain. 1 year later, Walter Freeman, a psychiatrist at Washington School of Medicine, developed a new technique called lobotomy. No anesthesia or even surgery was needed. He would use an instrument resembling an ice pick to make a hole in the skull above the eye, aiming to sever the nerve connections to the frontal lobe. The procedure became popular, especially during the mid-20th century when mental hospitals were overcrowded and patients were in desperate need of treatment. However, not all procedures went smoothly. Some patients experienced personality changes, while others remained unresponsive or died. Lobotomy lost its popularity in the late 1950s when psychotropic drugs were invented. These drugs offered a less invasive and more effective solution for many mental health issues. But this was unnecessarily a good thing, as these drugs still cause harm to patients and have caused deaths themselves. For example, thorazine, one of the most commonly used has been known to cause symptoms like dry mouth, constipation, blurred vision, and involuntary movements of the body. Antidepressants are no different either, as they have side effects like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headaches, dizziness, and loss of appetite. There have been numerous cases of people dying due to overdosing on antidepressants as well. In fact, in 1962, a 22-year-old woman committed suicide by overdosing on the antidepressant called IP. Similarly, in 1974, a 19-year-old girl took her own life by ingesting a massive amount of the antidepressant called amid. And in 1993, a 31-year-old man died after mixing the antidepressant fluoxetine with alcohol. Now, going back to lobotomy, its inventor, Walter Freeman, boasted a success rate of 85% with the procedure, but critics argued that he was counting minor improvements as major successes, leading to a distorted view of its effectiveness. Freeman defended his work, claiming that any procedure with a 5% mortality rate was successful. Despite the controversy, thousands of lobotomies were performed, often without informing the patients' families of the risks involved. Some procedures were done on children as young as 4, leaving many questioning the ethics of such actions. The lobotomy procedure sounds barbaric by today's standards, yet it reflects the desperation and limited understanding of mental illness during its time. Doctors were genuinely trying to alleviate the suffering of their patients, albeit with methods that seem crude and inhumane today. Imagine if someone stuck an ice pick through your eye socket without warning. You'd probably drop to the floor in a faint. This is exactly what some patients experienced. Take the case of Clementine Barnabette, a seemingly ordinary housewife, whose lobotomy took a sinister turn. During the procedure, she suddenly sat up, grabbed the doctor's face, and bit off part of his nose. Clearly, the operation had not diminished her reflexes and motor functions. Instead, it had transformed her into an even greater danger to those around her. In another instance, a lobotomy patient identified only as Rosemary became uncontrollably violent after the procedure. Her aggression was so extreme that she had to be locked in a straitjacket for the rest of her life. These stories, while extreme, highlight the potential dangers of lobotomy. It's not just the physical risks, like infection or brain damage, but also the psychological toll on the patients and medical staff. Lobotomy stripped away not just the frontal lobe connections, but also a sense of humanity in the operating room. But the most alarming aspect of these botched lobotomies is the lack of accountability. When things went wrong, as they often did, the doctors rarely admitted fault. Instead, they shifted the blame to the patients, labeling them as incurable or dangerous beyond repair. It was easier to dismiss the tragic outcomes as part of the disease rather than confront the possibility that their treatments might be at fault. This attitude not only shielded the medical community from scrutiny, but also denied justice to the patients and their families who suffered tremendously. In the case of Rosemary Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy's younger sister, her lobotomy was performed without telling anyone, not even her own mother. After the procedure, her condition worsened rapidly, and she died a few days later. The secrecy surrounding her illness and death raised questions about whether the lobotomy was truly the best course of action, or if it was a hasty decision made out of desperation and fear. Dr. Howard Dandy, haunted by the lobotomy he performed on the 14-year-old girl in 1941, started to question the procedure's effectiveness and safety. He researched alternative treatments and even developed a new type of insulin shock therapy. He believed that lobotomy had taken too many lives and maimed countless others, destroying families and leaving medical professionals grappling with the ethical implications of their actions. After retiring from active practice, he continued to care for his wife and explore his artistic interests, finding solace in hobbies like oil painting and writing poetry. We hope you enjoyed this creepy poster-style video. If you did, please leave a like and comment before you go. And today I will be reading an excerpt from my upcoming novel, The Asylum at Willow Creek. Rain lashes the tall windows, blurring the gaslight glow that spills from within onto the manicured lawns. Inside, damp earth and overripe lilies mingle in the air, cloying and heavy, a smell that follows me everywhere now. The air grows thick with dread as we near the end of our investigation. There is nothing more terrifying than a secret kept hidden beneath layers of deceit and the fear of exposure. The year is 1895 and the Willowbrook Asylum stands like a tombstone against the stormy sky. I assure you, Miss Blackwood, the machinery is old. Such mishaps are bound to occur. The staff dealt with it swiftly and appropriately. Her chin lifts slightly, and I see just how tightly she's wound. No one enters the office while she's here. I saw how her shoulders squared, how her fingers curled into fists. She is fighting to maintain her composure, but it is a losing battle. Her face is framed by wisps of graying red hair escaping her bun. I see a glint of metal on her desk, half hidden beneath a pile of documents. Fear is a weapon as well. Am I ask softly, turning away to hide the tears stinging my eyes. Rumors follow me like a shadow, whispering of ghoulish experiments conducted in the dead of night, of bodies stolen from the morgue, of lives extinguished to further a twisted science. I spin around to find Evelyn's face, drained of color. The door bursts open, and one of the orderlies enters, breathless and panicked. If only I could wake up and find myself back in London, safe and sound in my own bed, dreaming of home. Here, every room I enter, every floorboard I tread, every portrait I pass, whispers of madness and murder. Their words are unintelligible, but their meaning clear. They know something about this place, about the doctors and their terrible work, about the fires and the leaks. I flinch, reaching out a hand to steady myself. Madness lies close by, and I can feel its fetid breath on the back of my neck. In photographs tucked away in dusty albums, in paintings hanging in galleries, in portraits staring sightlessly from the walls of madhouses across Europe. They call him Patient 37, and he's the reason I have come to this place. The reason I will leave it changed forever. I'll come with you, she says, her voice low. I start back, pressing myself against the wall, my pulse pounding in my ears. Tall and gaunt, with eyes like shattered glass, he smiles, baring teeth that are too sharp, too numerous. Did you bring me the scalpel? He asks. His voice is a rasp, like sandpaper on bone. His grin splits his face, revealing a glimpse of something feral and wild. And now that I've seen him, I am trapped here forever, each drop a tiny hammer blow, driving the final nails into the coffin of my sanity. The asylum stands watch, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets closely. Within its four walls, darkness festers, growing stronger with each passing hour, and I am caught in its web, a moth drawn to a flame that will consume me whole. The asylum presses in around me, suffocating me with its secrets. I struggle to breathe, to speak, but the words catch in my throat. All I can manage is a strangled whisper. What do you want? Then she turns back to me, her eyes boring into mine. The shadows here are alive, and they hunger for company. Miss Blackwood, I am sorry to be abrupt, but this matter is of the utmost urgency. She gives me a tight smile, the corners of her mouth trembling slightly. Do you try and find something interesting in the archives, won't you? Or perhaps a nice spot for tea. I do hope you enjoy your stay at Will. Doctor, he gasps. The furnace, it sprung a leak. The whole room's flooded. We need to get the pump working again. What has he done? What is he doing? In this place? I don't want to know. Moonlight filters through the barred windows, painting the walls in shades of silver and shadow. I round a corner and come upon a group of patients huddled together, their eyes blank and staring. They don't acknowledge my presence. I don't acknowledge theirs. I pretend they're not there. These shadows with hollow sockets and vacant grins. A scalpel. Its handle is ivory, carved with minute detail, a delicate spray of forget-me-nots climbing its length. I recognize it instantly. It belonged to Dr. Vernon Harwell, her brother. He brought it with him to America when he fled Europe, leaving behind a trail of accusations and a woman who looked an awful lot like Evelyn. My voice sounds thin and reedy even to my own ears. A shift, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt, willing my knees to stop shaking. Leave that where it is, Miss Blackwood. It holds no relevance to your investigation. Why does a doctor need a scalpel in her office if she doesn't use it to treat her patients? She's giving me an order, though she masks it with polite words. Her tone tells me everything. She thinks I am a threat, and now I am afraid. Afraid, because I know I am. She flinches, then laughs, a humorless sound. She runs a hand through her hair, a gesture of despair. Too late. I have touched it. I know its coldness, its sharpness. More important, I know its history. I'm a pillar of reason and logic. I refuse to be cowed by these drafty halls, or the secrets they hold close. She's beautiful, perhaps once dazzling, though it is impossible to be sure beneath the layer of weariness that clings to her skin like cobwebs. Fatigue pulls at my own eyes. It's late, far later than I care to be alone in this place. In the dimly lit parlor, we find the asylum's director, Dr. Evelyn Hartwell, seated behind a large oak desk, strewn with papers, instruments, and wax seals. Dr. Harwell, I want to ask you again about the fire in the incinerator room. I told you, Miss Blacklock, the machinery overheated. Nothing more than that. She reaches for a paper on her desk, but it's already too late. I see what's written there, scrawled in her spidery hand, the words stark on the page. Patient 37, repeat rotational therapy. The name means nothing to me, but the words chill me to the bone. Her lips are pale, almost white against her flushed skin. I recall a rocking chair in the corner of one of the wards, empty except for a stain upon its skirts, a stain that looks disturbingly like blood. Later, I will learn the truth of those stains and wish I had never seen them. But tonight, I have questions. And did this happen often? I ask, my gaze fixed on hers. How many others have met their end in this place? She flinches, startled by my insight, then recovers quickly. I rise, crossing the room, pushing down the fear that rises in my throat. The name Vernon Harwell is synonymous with dark things. Evelyn follows my gaze, her expression hardening. I turn back to her, fixing her with a steady gaze. Then explain why it's here. You may think yourself clever, Miss Blackwood, but you are treading on dangerous ground. I suggest you leave while you still can. I take a step back, careful to keep my face impassive. As I reach for the door, a sudden crash from the hall makes us both jump. A leak. What does he mean, a leak? What I really want to ask is what happened to patient 37. I don't dare. She nods curtly, rising from her chair. The echo of her words follows me as I leave the office. Enjoy my stay. This is a nightmare. I walk the hall slowly, letting the silence envelop me. What was that sound? I stop, listening intently. Voices drift down the corridor, hushed and conspiratorial. One of them, a man wrapped in a threadbare blanket, takes a step toward me. A shadow detaches itself from the others and steps forward. I know him. I've seen him before. He leans closer, his hot, fetid breath washing over me, carrying the scent of decay and disease. Who is he? Who am I? What am I doing here? His smile widens, and in that moment, I know he doesn't want anything. He is everything this place fears. The rain continues to lash against the windows, a relentless assault that mirrors the beating of my heart. This is the last entry in my journal. If anyone finds this place, if anyone dares to venture inside, please be careful. The year is 1895 and I am afraid. Thank you for listening. A shadowy figure creeps through the halls of the asylum, a gurney bumping along behind him. He ducks under a hanging lamp, the dim light catching the side of his face, revealing an eye patch over his left eye and a jagged scar bisecting his right eyebrow. We see her enter the room, her white coat billowing behind her like a dark cloud. She has wild red hair, a sharp nose and jaw, and eyes that gleam with manic energy. Within its stark walls, a small group of patients awaited their turn on the infamous water cure bed. She moves with the predatory grace of a cat, her gaze never leaving the patient strapped to the chair before her. He shook his head, his black hair falling over his face like a curtain. "And how does that feel?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. One of them, a burly man with a handlebar mustache, held up a leather strap. "Watch closely, gentlemen," she said, her tone hushed but excited. He wondered who was there with him. Maybe Nurse Ratched, her face creased with concern. But it wasn't her worried eyes that met his when he finally lifted his head. Dr. Hartley was kneeling beside him, her face pale but smiling. "Welcome back, 37, she said softly. He wanted to tell her he didn't remember anything, that he couldn't remember why he was here. "They say he's gone mad," that his eyes rolled back in his head and he screamed like a wild animal. As patient 12, a young woman with haunted eyes, was strapped to the bed, he felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. Your experiment is not over. You are needed. He wanted to warn her, to tell her it wasn't too late to turn back, but all that came out was a strangled cry. This is important, she said, opening the notebook. He even assisted in autopsies, learning the names of bones and organs by touch alone. These are your thoughts, but how will we know if they're really yours? I trust you won't repeat yesterday's mistake, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. He paced his cell, his mind racing. He had to get out, he decided. He had to escape and find help, expose what was happening here. You know better than to question my methods. He flinched. For the first time, he saw a flash of something dark and dangerous in her eyes. How will we know if you're not merely repeating what others have told you? You misunderstand, she said, her voice soft. Those pills merely help our patients sleep better. Didn't I tell you? Dr. Hartley's voice echoed in his ears, not to question my methods. She stood at the foot of the bed, a strange gleam in her eye. Do you remember, she asked softly, why you're here? What brought you to Will? He wanted to answer, but all that came out was a strangled cry. Everyone needs a good night's sleep, don't you agree? It was gone in an instant, replaced by the predatory gleam he knew so well. She leaned close, her eyes boring into his. We must make sure, don't you agree? He nodded dumbly. He knew she was right. It was a pill. He knew it instantly, because he'd seen them mixing up batches of pills earlier that week. He recognized his writing, or what used to be his writing. It was neat and precise. It was the cold, hard stare of one of the orderlies, his mouth twisted into a cruel smile. What you are about to witness, she said, her voice ringing with power, is not madness, it is a transformation. He also knew that whatever had happened to him, he didn't regret it. This is not a punishment, my dear 37, she said, leaning close, but a rebirth. You will be free. He felt himself slipping away, the boundaries of his body dissolving until all that remained was a swirling vortex of sensation. But he didn't want to disappoint her. He sensed something in her, an urgency to find answers, to tear open his head and see what lay within. It felt rusty, like an old swing set in winter. She pulls a lever, and the chair begins to rotate, faster and faster. The patient screams, then goes limp. You're ready. As they led him away, he heard her call after him. Remember, 37, your mind is like a vessel filled with water. He shivered. He had no idea what she was planning, but there was something about her, something dangerous. He looked up at her, startled by her intensity. This time it was mixed with anticipation, like a bird being readied for flight, he thought. Or maybe a fish, he corrected himself. He was becoming a fish. Sometimes it feels like my brain is breaking, he said, remembering the crushing weight of guilt and despair that threatened to pull him under. The doctor smiles, a feral expression twisting her face. From down the hall, we hear the clanging of metal instruments and the manic laughter of a woman. As the chair continues to spin, the camera pans away to reveal another patient hidden in the shadows, watching the scene with hollow eyes. I'm sorry, let me try that again. In 1895, the Willowbrook Asylum stood as a looming presence on the edge of town. She was young, maybe 30, with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. She looked at him with cool curiosity, like he was an interesting specimen under a microscope. It both intrigued and unnerved him. First up was patient 37. His real name was Jeremiah, but no one called him that anymore. They just called him 37 or sometimes Shattered, because after the accident at the mill, he'd been left with only a milky white eye to show the world. He sat strapped to the bed, head bowed, shoulders shaking slightly. When they came to lead him off to the tank room, he didn't resist. What was the point? Nothing made sense anymore. Not since the fire. Not since his brother had pushed him into the gears of the machine. Not since his world had turned cold and grey and silent except for the ringing in his ears. But today was different. Today, a new doctor was working. Her name was Evelyn. Tell me, 37, she said, her voice sharp as shards. How does your mind feel? Does it ache? Is it heavy? Can you see inside it? Dr. Hartwell leaned closer, her eyes boring into his. Then we shall make it lighter for you, she said, her voice hardening. She fastened the strap across his mouth, then stepped back to admire her work. In the tank room, he was strapped to the bed, submerged up to his neck in cold water. He heard Dr. Hartley's voice above him, and then Dr. Hartley began to speak, not to him, but to the man watching. The next few hours were a blur of cold and noise. The water was freezing, the spinning endless. When he finally opened his eyes, he was lying on a couch, wrapped in a blanket, his head pounding. She pressed a finger to her lips. "Don't speak yet," she said. "You need rest." And then she was gone. Later that day, when the other patients gathered for their weekly meeting, they buzzed with excitement. "Did you see him? Did you see what happened to him?" Jeremiah sat quietly, listening to their chatter. He still didn't remember anything. The next morning, he found himself back in the tank room. This time, he was the one watching. Dr. Hartley entered the room, her face grave. "See here, 37, she said, her voice tight. She took him to a small, sparsely furnished office. On the table was a notebook and a scalpel. "Your thoughts," she said, tapping the page with the tip of the scalpel. "Then let us delve deeper," she said, reaching for the scalpel. Days turned into weeks. The treatments continued. The experiments intensified. He became known as the doctor's assistant, a title that both terrified and exhilarated him. One night, while making his rounds, he saw one of the orderlies slip something into a patient's food. He sought out Dr. Hartley, who listened patiently to his concerns. He tried to bring up the topic again the next day, but she shut him down quickly. That night, he didn't sleep, but the next morning, he woke up strapped to the water cure bed. "Then let us remind you," she said, pulling a lever. The bed lurched forward, plunging him into cold, dark water. As he struggled against his bonds, he saw a flicker of fear cross her face, and as the water rose to his lips, he gave her a smile. "Before we go, please subscribe for more terrifying tales." All the screams have faded now. The moans and pleas for mercy are silent. The clanging of shackles is a distant memory. The cries of children lost to the night are stilled. All is quiet now. The halls are empty. The wards are bare. The padded cells are vacant. But something remains. The oil lamp was supplanted by the electric light. The phonograph yielded to the radio. The world rushed headlong into the modern age, embracing new technologies, new ideas, new ways of life. The days of the spinning chair and the water cure were over, replaced by more insidious, more effective means of control. Insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, barbiturates, all were used in an effort to alleviate the symptoms of mental illness. Why did they strap the howling madman to a chair and force him to drink bitter drugs? The darkness that drove men to create institutions of confinement and torture. The darkness that allowed them to experiment on the innocent and the helpless. The darkness that permitted them to inflict pain and suffering in the name of progress and enlightenment. As we walk the deserted halls, we can almost feel it pressing against us, a palpable weight in the stale, dusty air. It's a reminder that the darkness is always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for its chance to rise again. We may have come a long way since the days of the asylums, but the darkness remains. It's in the shadows that lurk at the edge of our vision, in the whispers that seem to come from nowhere and nowhere. To those who listen closely, we can hear the echoes of screams and sobs in the dead of night, a haunting reminder of the darkness that still persists in our world. Or why did they lock the poor girl who couldn't stop shaking in a straitjacket, hanging her in the padded cell until she stopped moving? What if there was another reason, something darker, something more sinister, something that lay at the heart of it all, something that had been lost to time? What if it wasn't just about saving the damned, but about controlling them? What if it was about power, about domination, about the insatiable hunger of man to dominate his fellow man, even in the darkest depths of his madness? What if it was about the thirst for knowledge, the unquenchable desire to unlock the secrets of the human mind, no matter the cost? What if it was about the very essence of humanity, about what it means to be human, to suffer, to endure, to fight for survival, to claw one's way back from the brink of oblivion, to triumph over adversity, to prevail in the face of overwhelming odds? What if it was about the will to live, to survive, to endure, to overcome, to persevere, to triumph, to prevail, to persist, to resist, to retaliate, to rebel, to revolt, to revolutionize, to transform, to transcend? What if it was about the struggle for freedom, the relentless pursuit of liberty, the unwavering determination to break the chains of oppression and defy the forces that would keep us enslaved? What if it was about the power of the human spirit, the indomitable will that burns brightly even in the darkest of times, the unbreakable resolve that refuses to yield to adversity? What if it was about the triumph of hope over despair, the unwavering belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow, the courage to dream big dreams and fight for them relentlessly? Why did they lobotomize the young soldier whose mind was broken by war, severing the very essence of his being in the hopes that it would bring him peace? They did these things because they believed it was necessary, because they thought they had no other choice. They were faced with a monster, and they sought to slay it. But maybe the real monster was the asylum itself, the system that created these monsters, the society that feared and rejected them. Maybe it was the darkness in our nature that drove us to such extreme measures, the darkness that lies dormant within us all, waiting for its chance to emerge. Insulin shock therapy involved inducing a hypoglycemic state in the patient through massive doses of insulin, causing them to lapse into a coma-like state from which they would eventually emerge cured. Electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, consisted of passing an electric current through the brain, inducing a seizure in the patient, which was believed to have a therapeutic effect. Barbiturates were also used as a form of treatment, believed to calm and soothe the agitated patient. But as the century wore on, the true cost of these treatments became apparent. Insulin shock therapy resulted in the deaths of many patients, while ECT left others with severe cognitive impairment. The barbiturates, meanwhile, were highly addictive and had little lasting effect on mental illness. Yet despite the dangers and drawbacks of these treatments, they were still used for decades, a testament to the desperation and hope that characterized the early days of psychiatric treatment. But some things remained the same, and among those things were the human need to understand the workings of the mind. We picture the cruel doctors performing experiments on their helpless charges, inflicting pain and misery for the sake of science, or simply because they could. While this may have been true in some cases, it's important to remember that these institutions were also at the forefront of medical research and innovation. Doctors and scientists were working tirelessly to find new and better ways to treat mental illness, and they were willing to try just about anything to find what worked. They were driven by a desire to help their patients, albeit in ways that we now consider unethical or even barbaric, but they genuinely believed that they were doing good, that their experiments, no matter how painful or unpleasant they may be for the patient, were ultimately for their own good. They were trying to cure them, to make them better, to return them to a semblance of normalcy. Whether or not they succeeded is a matter of debate, but their intentions, however misguided, were pure. They saw themselves as healers, not torturers, as pioneers, not butchers, to conquer the darkness that lay within us all, to cure those who suffered from the ills that none could see, but all could fear. Those who walked the earth at the turn of the century, those who had witnessed the horrors of war, who had stared into the abyss and emerged shaken but unbroken. They looked upon the asylums with a mixture of fascination and horror. For what happened within those high-walled institutions, what went on behind those heavy oak doors, was a mystery to most. Whispers spoke of terrible things done in the name of progress, of experiments conducted on the unwilling, of treatments that bordered on the inhumane, and yet still they came, seeking answers, seeking solace, seeking to understand. Something lingers in the chill air, something that clings to the peeling paint and gathers in the dust motes dancing in the faint light that filters through grimy windows. The process itself was fascinating, terrifying, a peek into the most intimate recesses of the human psyche. There were several methods used, but the most popular was the lobotomy. First, the patient was injected with a drug that would render them unconscious. Then, while their brain was still wet, the doctor would take a sharp instrument and sever the connections between the frontal lobe and the rest of the brain. This procedure was said to alleviate some of the symptoms of mental illness, but it also carried with it a high mortality rate. Many patients died as a result of the procedure, and those who survived often suffered from severe side effects. Despite this, the lobotomy was seen as a medical marvel, a triumph of modern science over the intractable mysteries of the mind. People came from all over to witness the procedure for themselves, eager to see what wonders it might bring. The doctors performed the operation with showmanship, drawing gasps and murmurs of awe from their audience as they plunged the instrument deep into the patient's skull. Afterwards, they would exhibit the removed portion of the brain, holding it up for all to see, explaining the defects that caused the patient's madness. Here in the abandoned asylums, the things left behind are not the screams, but the ghosts. Ghosts of suffering, of anguish, of lives lived and lost within these four walls. They walk the corridors still, though no living foot has disturbed the silence here for decades. They gather in the overgrown gardens, tender flower beds where vibrant blooms now choke the crumbling statues. They sit in the padded chairs, stare out the barred windows. Some of them watch us now as we explore their world, the remnants of their world, forever frozen in time. These are the ghosts of the forgotten, of the lost, of the damned. They are the patients who never left Riverview, the Wolf's Head, the Retreat, Bloomingdale, Danvers, the Asylum, Currensibes. They are nameless now, faceless, voiceless. They are the ones who suffered the most, endured the cruelest punishments. They are the ones who never made it out alive. We've heard their stories, or what passes for their stories. Stories whispered in the dead of night around crackling campfires, tales spun by flickering candlelight in musty old books. Now we look at these places. Now we peer through the bars and broken windows and see only emptiness. It's hard to imagine these cold, silent rooms once echoed with the screams of tortured souls. But they did. Here the doctors came, eager to help, eager to fix. What they didn't understand was that some things can't be fixed, some minds can't be healed, some wounds run too deep. But they tried anyway, sometimes because they wanted to, sometimes because they had to. In the early 20th century, the world changed. The horse-drawn hearse gave way to the motorcar. As the 20th century dawned, lobotomies became more common. The 20th century brought with it new tools, new techniques, new ways of treating the sick mind. When we think of the horrors of the asylums, we imagine a time when patients were treated like animals, locked up in dark, dank cells, without any hope of ever seeing the light of day again. But why did they believe these things, these desperate, doomed measures? As the sun sets over the barren landscape, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds of the abandoned asylums, we are left to contemplate the darkness that lies within us all. And then we wonder, what if it wasn't all about saving the damned?